The
Wow.
architecture is totally different to what you've just experienced at MALMÖ Castle.
Wow!
And when you're walking the streets, it's an interesting mixture of incredibly modern buildings mixed with very traditional Swedish
Wow.
architecture. Take this place for example.
Olá a todos, sejam bem-vindos a mais um vídeo nesse canal. Nós somos cidadãos do terceiro mundo e nesse canal nós reagimos e aprendemos sobre o primeiro mundo. Nesse vídeo vamos reagir à cidade de Malmö, na Suécia.
Sim, portanto, considere se inscrever em nosso canal, clique no gostei, compartilhe esse vídeo e agora vamos para a reação.
Welcome to another episode of Ultimate Bucket List, and this is your complete guide to the city of Malmö. Where to explore, what to do, how to eat some bugs and spiders, and how to have an amazing time when you're visiting this lovely southern Swedish city. Welcome to the third largest city in Sweden.
Incrível.
It's an incredibly quirky city full of historical sites, modern architecture, and some very strange things in between. The one thing you'll notice about Malmö is that it's very clean and very green.
Wow!
It's one of the greenest cities that I've ever been to. But it's not just about parks. There's plenty of cool, quirky things to do here, so let me show you around the place. Firstly though, how to get here. Even though Malmö does have its own international airport, most people fly into Copenhagen International and take a short 20-minute train from Denmark to Malmö. You'll probably arrive here at Malmö Central Station.
Tipo, em 20 minutos você tá em outro país. Meu Deus, que loucura. Incrível.
Incrível.
You can get to pretty much anywhere in Sweden or any other of the Scandinavian countries from here. But let's wander down the street and visit the most famous attraction in all of Malmö. MALMÖ Castle. From the outside, it just looks like an old building with two red huts. But surprisingly, this is quite a fortified castle. It's surrounded by this giant moat, and in the middle is the actual castle bit itself. I gotta say that MALMÖ Castle is possibly the most random castle that I've ever been to in my life. And I've been to a lot. Yes, there's a specific bit of the castle where you can explore the castle ramparts, learn about the history of the castle, explore all the military stuff.
Wow.
These red huts right here, they're fortress bastions. You can explore the interior of the castle, where the king used to sleep and work, etc. It's all very interesting. But it's not just a castle, it's also a historic museum that you can learn about the history of the city. But it's also an art gallery, where you can spend some time looking at famous pieces of art. But it's also a fashion museum. Currently they've got an exhibit dedicated to Muslim fashion, rather randomly. But it's also a church. You can have services right here. But it's also a natural history museum, kind of like the one in London, albeit a lot smaller. But it's also an aquarium, where you can see jellyfish and frogs and snakes. God, I hate snakes. But it's also an architecture exhibit, so there is a lot to see in this castle. And given that the entry fee is roughly about £3, it's definitely value for money. If I'd known how much was in here, I probably would have done MALMÖ Castle at the beginning of the day, rather than an hour before closing time. Because with your admission to MALMÖ Castle, it also allows you access to the Technology Museum across the street.
É incrível, eu preciso comentar que eu antigamente, antes de reagir aos vídeos e conhecer esses incríveis países, eu só via esses castelos em filmes, em desenhos, e eu não sabia que era assim, que tem esse riozinho em volta, esse lago. Eu achei que era uma coisa de filme só, mas é verdade, tem isso.
Sim, eu também. Eu antes de conhecer esses países com detalhe, porque eu sabia do conhecimento, eu sabia da existência desses países, mas eu não sabia o que tinha nesses países. E eu fico impressionado que muitas coisas que a gente vê nesses países é tudo que a gente viu em filme. E o filme, geralmente, ele reproduz muito do que é a realidade. E é incrível ver que, na verdade, os filmes se inspiram em coisas realmente reais.
Sim, é verdade. Pode não ser a nossa realidade, né? Mas é uma coisa real, é a realidade deles. Isso é muito louco.
Exato.
Obviously, I ran out of time before I could actually go inside, but maybe the next time I'm in Malmö, I'll definitely visit. Right next to the Technology Museum, you'll find this fishing harbour, full of these quaint little fishing houses and this rather cool fish market. So if you're in the mood for some freshly caught fish, you can get it literally right here. Not that you would as a tourist, but maybe some of you might be interested. I mentioned earlier in the video that Malmö is an incredibly green city.
Wow!
And the area around Malmö Castle is surrounded by parks.
Oh.
Most notably, Slottstrad Garden. That's a beautiful botanical garden that you can walk through, especially on a nice day like today. It also has its own windmill.
Wow!
Very, very Dutch, even though we're in Sweden. And it also has a river running through it. It's a nice lookout point to sit back and contemplate life.
Lugar.
Slottstrad Garden is definitely worth exploring just to look at the flowers or just to relax a little bit. Across the way, you'll find Kungsparken, aka the King's Park. This one's a lot more foresty, there's definitely a lot more trees around here, but it's no less spectacular. There's also a casino nearby. Not sure if this is an actual casino or not, or whether or not it's just called that, but this whole area is definitely worth exploring, especially if you've got a bit of time to kill.
É incrível, esse lugar transmite uma paz, uma calma,
Sim, sem
uma
dúvida.
energia maravilhosa.
Sim, é um lugar para se você passa um dia muito estressante ou você teve uma semana de trabalho, esse é o lugar que você tem que descansar e relaxar. Incrível.
Sim.
Across the street, you'll come to the area known as Centrum, aka the city centre. As soon as you step in, things are a lot different. You can tell from the street art on the buildings and on the walls, and the architecture is totally different to what you've just experienced at Malmö Castle.
Wow!
And when you're walking the streets, it's an interesting mixture of incredibly modern buildings mixed with very traditional Swedish architecture. Take this place for example, Lilletorg. It's like a little town square, and you'll marvel at some of the architecture here.
Eu amo isso.
The buildings are very lovely. Some look very, very Tudor-esque. The quaint little shops here sell various stereotypical Swedish goods. Clogs, horses, scarves, that sort of thing.
Que legal,
and I particularly like this
bonito.
well, which I assumed it used to be the town's water supply. And it's pretty cool that they've kept this running and intact. Right next door to that, you'll find the biggest town square in the city. This is the Torget, complete with these very colonial buildings, this statue of the king, and it's also home to Malmö Town Hall. It's a very impressive looking building. It looks fantastic from the outside. I'm pretty sure that it's not a tourist attraction, so you can't really go inside, but it definitely is worth exploring when you're out here.
Incrível,
and for some reason they're flying the flag of
belíssima.
Australia in and amongst these flags of Sweden. Interesting.
Uau, é fantástico conhecer cada detalhe da Suécia, realmente é impressionante. Uau, e a gente sempre se surpreende, é incrível como cada lugar na Suécia é algo único e muito surpreendente.
Sim, isso que eu ia comentar, que eu acho que na Suécia não tem nenhuma cidade feia, nenhuma cidade suja, mal cuidada, é incrível. Você não vê moradores de rua, você não vê animais abandonados, é uma organização, é uma coisa invejável, realmente invejável.
Sim.
But the square itself is actually very lovely and it's definitely worth exploring. One street away, you'll find the largest church in the city. This is St. Peter's. From the outside, it does look pretty impressive. On the inside, you'll find that it's very white. You'll notice that all of the churches, especially around the Scandi countries, tend to paint their walls bright white. I quite like that. It makes them look very light and airy. I particularly like the modern style organ pipes mixed in with the ancient tombs. and there's a lot of ancient tombs in here. If you're a fan of the traditional churches, this one might seem a little bit boring. The more interesting thing is right at the back, where they have the original medieval paintings.
Incrível a riqueza de
But as it's a
detalhes.
free of charge attraction, you'd be silly to not spend at least 5 minutes just to explore. Whilst you're around Centrum actually, have a walk around the streets, because you'll find some of the most varied buildings that you'll see in any one city. It's like planning permission doesn't exist here, they'll just build anything anywhere. That's especially true of this monstrosity right here, the Museum of Modern Art. I'm not a big art fan, so I never went in, but it's definitely there if you like that sort of thing. But walk back along the river and you'll eventually come across Gustav Adolf's Torg. It's another public square, but this time round you'll probably find shops and amenities that are more familiar to what you're used to back at home. Whilst you're here, take the bridge across the river, where you'll notice these rather interesting shoe sculptures. I'm pretty sure these are the shoes of various famous people that are either from MALMÖ or Sweden, and it's pretty cool to actually walk along and see if you recognise any of the names. As soon as you cross the bridge, you'll come across one of the most interesting museums you'll ever see. The Disgusting Food Museum. As the name implies, it's a museum dedicated to the most disgusting food on the planet. Given that I'm British and also Chinese, quite a lot of this stuff I didn't find particularly weird at all. Frogs? Yeah, we eat that. Pufferfish? Yeah, that's normal. Bats and insects? Yeah, no problem. It's pretty cool to see what some of the weirdest food on the planet actually looks like. There's even sections where you can smell some of the stuff, and boy, some of this stuff really stinks. At the end of your museum tour, you actually get to try some of these things. Like I said, I'm used to eating most of this stuff anyway. The only two things I really didn't like is this rancid brand of Swedish cheese and hakal, aka fermented shark meat that tastes like urine. I managed to complete the challenge, but boy, the chili section was fairly unpleasant. 11 days since last vomit, with 338 total vomiteurs. Wow, impressive. Once you've finished eating disgusting food, you'll realise you're in the most modern bit of the city of MALMÖ, complete with modern shops, modern streets, and even this giant mega shopping complex called the Triangle.
Tudo misturado, é tudo muito
It's so big,
bonito.
it has its own train station. Right next door, you'll find the other most famous church in the city. This is St. Johannes' church. From the outside, it looks very impressive, and from the inside, well, it looks very similar to the other one. It's definitely a lot smaller, but definitely worth exploring. And once again, it's free of charge to enter. At this point, you'll probably cross over to the district of Möllevången. Again, the buildings are definitely very different, massively varied. There's a pretty cool statue here, and it definitely seems a lot more laid back. It's definitely worth a few minutes to explore, especially on a nice day like today. If you're after a bit of culture, the MALMÖ Opera House and the MALMÖ Concert Hall are literally right across the street from each other, right here on the main road.
Uau! Eu adoro, realmente, eu adoro a diversidade que demonstra aqui, porque Malmö é uma cidade, eu espero ter pronunciado o nome corretamente, mas é uma cidade que tem uma riqueza cultural muito interessante, porque você vê que tem museus ali, você vê que há casas de ópera ali.
Sim.
Você percebe também essa questão gastronômica, que é muito diferente, mas eu acredito que não tenha somente isso, o fator gastronômico não seja somente isso, é porque ele está mostrando porque é algo realmente muito curioso. Mas é incrível a diversidade que Malmö tem.
Sim, é verdade. Isso é o que mais impressiona, essa mistura de coisas, né? É uma cidade que parece ser tão tranquila, tão calma, mas ao mesmo tempo tem muita coisa moderna, tem muita coisa para se fazer.
Sim.
E isso cria um contraste, assim, uma coisa incrível. Realmente é um lugar que deve ser muito maravilhoso estar. Porque você tem tudo ali, tudo.
Across the map, you'll also find another giant park space, Pilsdamsparken, with this beautiful lake and interesting architecture. And it's at this point you'll also come across all of the sporting facilities. So if you're into sports, Swedbank Stadion is the main stadium here in Malmö that's home to the professional football team.
Uau!
There's also an athletics track nearby, and it's also next to Malmö
Eu não sabia
Arena,
que eles tinham
which is
isso
the
lá.
home venue of the city's beloved ice hockey team, the Malmö Redhawks. If you get a chance to catch a game, it does come highly recommended, because the atmosphere here is always very, very good. The attractions I've mentioned so far are the must-see and do
É
things if you have
incrível
a short
quando
time
você vê
here
aquilo
in
de
Malmö.
cima.
If you've got a little bit more time, travel to the north part of the city, where you'll find this industrial area and the harbour. It's very interesting to walk around. There's some very interesting named buildings, this one rather unfortunately named the World Trade Center, but it's also home to possibly Sweden's most famous
Isso é
building,
muito louco.
the Turning Torso. It's the only building in the world that's rotated 90 degrees, and from a distance it looks pretty amazing, and from underneath it looks absolutely towering. But the one thing they don't tell you is that this is a residential complex.
Uau!
You can't actually go inside.
Uau!
Apparently they do tours of the place at various times of the year, but they are incredibly rare. I definitely would have loved to have gone up this particular
Eu
tower
jurava que isso era
just to
uma
say
coisa
that I've been up it, but
comercial.
standing underneath it, that's good enough for me. If I get bored, hey, I can at least have plastic surgery across the street. If you're a fan of the big outdoors, you're sport for
Olha
choice
que
pretty much
lindo.
here in Malmö. If it's nice like it is today, you can explore Malmö Beach.
Praia?
The last thing I would recommend, if you have the time and aren't shy, is visit the Ribersborg Kallbergshus. This is the public open-air bath, where you can blast open your pores in a hot wooden sauna, and then dive straight into the freezing cold sea to cool off. It's meant to be very good for you, but the one thing they don't tell you is that everyone in here, male and female, is completely nude. The Swedes, they have a liberal attitude to nudity, and pretty much everything is co-ed. So if you want to spend some time naked in a wooden box full of sweaty Swedes, this is definitely the place for you. Fun times.
Eles
Overall
fazem
guys,
isso.
a trip to Malmö
Nossa.
is definitely worth it, especially if you're doing a tour of Sweden or if you're visiting nearby Copenhagen. Check out my other video to see what that's like. Okay Nin, I'm sold. What do I need to do? Well, you need to come here to Malmö. As earlier mentioned in the video, Malmö has its own international airport, but most people fly into Copenhagen International and literally take a 20-minute train to Malmö Central train station. When you're in the city of Malmö, you don't actually need public transport. Everything is pretty much walkable, but if you do need public transport, the bus network is vast and varied, and you'll have no problem navigating the buses to get you around the city.
Uau!
The cost? Well, the attractions are incredibly reasonable. It's no different to any other European city, and in the case of Malmö Castle, definitely value for money. But quite a lot of the things in Malmö are free to visit anyway, especially when it comes to things outdoors. So most of the time you'll be visiting things like parks, exploring the sculptures, having a look at the architecture. All of that is pretty much free of charge.
Incrível.
If you're looking for a place to stay, I recommend staying somewhere near Malmö Central Station,
Olha isso.
Centrum, or just north of Malmö Castle. And the hotel prices are quite reasonable here. Is there anything else I need to know? Yes, contactless payments have become the de facto way of paying for goods and services here in Sweden. You could come here without a cent of Swedish krona, and so long as you have a contactless credit or debit card, you'll be absolutely fine. Sweden takes its recycling very seriously, and if you buy drinks that come in glass or plastic containers, you'll be charged a small deposit fee. You'll get this deposit fee back once you dispose of your containers in one of the many machines across the city, which I never bothered to
Uau,
do.
que legal.
Incrível.
And finally, whilst the official language here is Swedish, most Swedish people speak Swedish and English bilingually. So if you're an
Sim, isso é
English speaker,
incrível.
you'll be absolutely fine. But you'll also find the locals speaking French, German, Danish, Finnish, Norwegian. So long as you speak any Western language, you'll probably be fine here in Malmö. If you have enjoyed this episode, please be sure to like, share and subscribe.
Uau,
Comment on the comment section below, and if you've got any other bucket list ideas you want me to make a video about, tweet them at me, and if I get enough of these suggestions, I'll probably go and make a video about it. But guys, thanks very much for watching, and we'll see you in the next episode.
Incrível!
No, I've not tried one of these yet.
Incrível!
Sim, é verdade, e é incrível como a gente pode cada vez mais ficar surpresos e conhecer melhor sobre esse incrível país. E eu não paro de ficar impressionado, porque sempre são cidades lindas e é muito legal, é uma cultura muito diferente, tem paisagens lindas e essa questão mesmo do lixo, olha que coisa incrível, essa questão de reciclagem. Isso é um lugar, uma cidade de primeiro mundo, então você vai encontrar coisas assim, realmente eles incentivam a cuidar do meio ambiente.
Não, sem dúvidas, é um lugar fantástico. Mais uma vez, eu tô muito impressionado em conhecer a Suécia, lugares incríveis, fantásticos. Malmö realmente é uma cidade muito diferente. Eu acredito que a gente ainda pode conhecer muitas outras coisas da Suécia, que é um país fantástico, incrível, com uma diversidade cultural impressionante. Mas eu fiquei maravilhado realmente com Malmö pela possibilidade de você poder passear lá de uma forma barata, no sentido de que você pode frequentar esses lugares
Sim.
Que seja economicamente acessível e possibilite você de passear num lugar incrível.
Sim, é verdade. E é muito engraçado ver como é uma cultura diferente, que você vê que no final mostra as pessoas todas tomando banho nu. Isso é muito engraçado, porque aqui a gente não tem esses costumes, embora as pessoas falem dos nossos biquínis, que são muito pequenos. Então acaba sendo muito interessante isso.
Sim, realmente a Suécia é um país fantástico.
Sim, sem dúvidas, mas essa foi a reação desse vídeo. Então, se você gostou, deixa bastante like e aproveita também para fazer mais sugestões aqui embaixo nos comentários.
Considere se inscrever em nosso canal. Muito obrigado por assistir esse vídeo e a gente se vê na próxima reação.
Tchau!